And where did it come from? Taylor.
It's a development that is designed in a way that helps the transit system function and incentivizes people to use the public transportation infrastructure.
Ridership. Reading broadly is what you just said. Those are the three really crucial elements. It is a design-based approach to development that is motivated by making alternative modes of transportation easier, more convenient, and maybe more logical to use than under less, shall we say, less intentional forms of new development. So this grew out of the kind of environmental movement in the mid 1970s, 1980s, a reaction to a very automotive type of urban design. Some would say suburban design, there's nothing very urban about it. That really starting just before World War II and then going forward gangbusters after the war, was a way of development that inherently, implicitly, if not explicitly, assumed that everybody would drive for just about every trip, drive cars. This was modern living, and going into World War II, we were coming out of a horrible economic depression, and people were tired of the old ways. We wanted something new, and new meant it had fins on it, and preferably a top that came down, and lots of style. And that's how we designed and constructed new developments. Was the kind of development analog of fins and so TOD was this kind of reaction to that, saying, wait a minute, does that really make common sense? And a lot of the inspiration here comes from the period before the economic depression, in the 1920s. Some people call this the golden age of American suburban development, because we got during the 1910s and the 1920s a style of development that incorporated the automobile, but did not make the automobile king, did not make the automobile dominant, or the people living in these suburbs completely reliant on the automobile. Some of you heard me say this. I grew up in one of these suburbs, and we owned one car, and it sat in the driveway all week when we grew up here. And it sat in the garage all week. We took it out on the weekends to go, special shopping trips or to go on recreational trips. But we didn't need to use it during the week. Why? Because elementary school is a block and a half that way. The train station that my dad went to get the train to go to Central City to go to work was 2 blocks that way. Also that direction was the shop where my mom worked. She was a liberated woman at a job. And the junior high, you could ride your bicycle to the high school, you put it through the half block away. And shopping, grocery stores, pharmacies, hardware stores, everything was in walking distance. And we were lower middle class. This was not Celebration or what was the one in the Gulf Coast of Florida, Seaside. This was not some sort of refugee dream. This was not some sort of refugee dream. And it was not a liberal plot to get people, fight people from their cars. You've heard me say that some of you, we were not environmentalists, and we were not even Democrats. And yet, we were living just a commonsensical way. It just made sense. And so what TOD is really after is trying to capture that golden moment where the automobile is incorporated into development designs, but is not made the dominant feature. You see, before the turn 20th century, we had development that assumed there were no automobiles, right? The pre-automotive age, and we had streets, but they were streets for horse-drawn carriages, or at least that was the design pattern. And so going back to that period of time as a precedent or an inspiration would make a lot of sense. So we had about a quarter century there before the stock market crash in 1929, where we had this style of development where kind of everything seemed to work. And so that's why TOD or neo-traditional design or new urbanism tends to look like it comes from about 100 years ago. And I think architects with some justification are dismissive of these styles of development because of that, the tendency to go to throwback styles of architecture in addition to throwback styles of town planning. They're not necessarily twin. They just, when you go out to a place like Daybreak, you tend to see them co-locate. You see, early 20th century town planning styles and block structure are twinned to get kind of faux early 20th century architecture. And so they tend to get combined together, but they're not necessarily associated with one another. I'm just one of these, probably the biggest advocate for these styles of development. He and his wife, intentionally created a neo-traditional, new urbanist development that uses only modernist architecture. Just to kind of prove the point that it does not necessarily require retrograde architecture in order to achieve some of these results. What are the defining elements? I mean, if you're going to create a transit-oriented development, what elements need to be?
Access.
Access. So access, meaning, first of all, adjacency, right? Adjacency to transit, I mean, it is the T and PLD. Adjacency to other things as well.
Alignment of interests. Like if you are developing next to a track station, not go home to
So, a certain sense of classification of uses, right?
Yeah.
So, understanding that big boxes you generally don't mesh, usually, because you don't frequently use transit very big. So, classification of uses into those that are transit supportive. And by definition, discouraging or completely outlawing, and those that are not. What else?
The motivation behind the utility development is kind of environmental, so we expect the community to be also environmentally conscious.
Yeah, but including what kind of elements?
Like just the features and issues with the road design.
Okay. Such as?
The light poles you use, the adding bike racks, if you go on top of that bike, so consider descriptions like compact parking.
So bicycle, let's unpack it. Bicycle and you see pedestrian infrastructure. Right. Key, right? What do we mean when we say that? I mean, certainly we're talking about bike lanes and we say bike racks and things like that. Sidewalks. What other things do pedestrians and bicyclists want? And Or do that.
Entertainment, restaurants.
So places to go. So and now you're talking about a mixture of uses, right? This is one of the things in a more auto-oriented urban dynamic is separation of uses, right? The geographic, physical separation of different functions across the landscape. And one of the things that TID and other similar styles of development are trying to orient some of this. So if you go back to Euclidean zoning and our discussion about Euclid versus Ambler, and the pyramids and what we call cumulative zoning, we said at that time that more modern zoning ordinances are not represented by the pyramid, the Euclid, for example, suggests, but by silence. That we have individually kind of separated zoning districts that allow certain specified uses and no others. And so we've got, I don't know, in the Salt Lake City zoning ordinance, who wants to hazard a guess, how many different residential districts, zoning districts in the Salt Lake City zoning ordinance? Yeah, I was going to say, it's in the 20s, it's got to be at least in the 20s. So you've got, single family zoning at 5,000 square foot minimum lot size. You've got single family zoning at 7,000 square foot minimum lot size. You've got single family zoning down to 4,000 square foot. And then you've got various kinds of townhome districts, and then multifamily districts, and then it just goes on and on and on. And what those things, by having a zoning ordinance that does that, you're essentially doing the silo. You're saying the functions that occur in these types of zoning districts are independent and isolated, and if you apply them onto a zoning map, you are, by perforce, excluding them or extending them, spreading them out across the landscape. And of course, that means that it's less likely if you are living in this district, you buy hardware that's located in this district and groceries located in this district and going to entertainment in this one. It's less likely that you'll be able to do them at least conveniently with anything but a car, right? And so, as Taylor said, one of the things that we're trying to do with PRD and similar types of zoning ordinances is to reintegrate uses into a mixture. Euclid and the zoning ordinances that were developed very ironically during the same period of time we've just been speaking about, kind of the golden age of the suburbs, is also when these very exclusionary zoning ordinances got established. And Euclid is a prime example of an attempt to try to improve public health by segregating, especially residential districts, from heavy industry. Because that's what was happening with Euclid. The kind of wave of heavy industrialization was spreading eastward out of Cleveland and into the first green suburbs. Euclid was one of those. And in order to protect the residential districts of Euclid from industrialization and all the public health negative impacts that go along with industrialization, they created these zoning districts, which excluded them. But then what happened was that it went on steroids. And we started excluding all sorts of things from residential districts that really don't have serious public health concerns. So there is an attempt to reintegrate at least those types of non-residential uses into residential districts that don't pose health problems. Basically, in the most aggressive zoning ordinances that address this, you'll basically find everything's allowed except for industrial uses. There was a hand up, Kyle? No.
That's some of the difficulties with excluding sites is that what needs to be done first is that retail and commercial or residential to incentivize residential buildings. Is what the single family residences usually those go in and then retail fall in. But in these situations it's like
Make it very difficult. So
you have to have a lot of money.
anytime you're building and you're developing, especially out of urban fringe, it's difficult because usually what they say, the rooftops lead. The houses come first, residential comes first to create the market, and the commercial comes after that. And so, yeah, that is, so in a place like Daybreak, I mean, that was kind of jump-started a bit by the developer. They had to work a lot of that. If you look at some of the other kind of hallmark traditional religious developments like Celebration in Florida, the Disney Corporation, under all the losses for that commercial strip, than down the Red Valley. That whole commercial portion of the development, they knew they had to have it, and they knew it wasn't going to make a profit. And so they basically wrote down the debt and the losses, the annual losses of the businesses that were into those storefronts because they knew they were out to help with the money. So that's why TOD, especially on this issue, tends to be more successful initially in places that are already built up. So, so the group here that worked on the Moneybird site for the real estate change, that was a great example because it's already built in an existing urban environment with existing commercial core. And so what we're doing is not coming in with trying to provide all different kinds of development. We're just providing one dimension. Okay, so what other infrastructure do we need? If you're walking, as you start walking along Salt Lake City block, what is, when it comes to blocks, what is Salt Lake City need? Ginormous, right? 10-acre block. Which means to get, if you're on one side of a Salt Lake City block and you want to go to exactly the opposite side of that same block, how far are you going? Quarter mile. Going a quarter mile just to go around the block. Imagine that. If there's one thing that pedestrians hate, they hate out of direction travel, man. They'd say, as the crow flies. No, it says the pedestrian walks. The crows fly all over. The pedestrians, you can see it on campus, right? Because they got this, office park vibe going here on campus. And they have buildings in a park, and you set like this, and you set like that, and lots of grass, Use the sidewalk that sweeps this way, and it sweeps this way. and where real people walk, they walk straight through, man. They don't care if the sidewalk's there or not. You can see that we're called goat tracks, right? You can see where, because you feel stupid if you will follow the sidewalk, The security cam somewhere, and somebody's sitting in that office and, look at that guy. He's following the sidewalk. What an idiot. Must be office next. So one of the things that's really important to this environmental orientation, especially the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, is what you said earlier. This issue of access. It's not just physical adjacency. It's also what we might call network adjacency, looking at the street network, and the finer grain of the street network, the more supportive it's going to be of people who are through that part. Because they're going to be able to go and navigate their way through the environment a bit more directly when they pick up these ginormous blocks. So,
is that considered easier?
Excuse me? Well, it depends on what you're building. I mean, if you're building out in the green fields and it's brand new and you're creating the street pattern from whole block, then it's fairly easy to do. You specify a block size that is deemed to be more pedestrian friendly, which is usually even more than 300 feet on the block list. If you're filling in, then yeah, you're probably looking for ways that you can kind of break up the block pattern. You're filling in this series. You're filling in in Portland, you don't need to. Portland has 10. 1, 200 feet. You fit 9 in the block. And a lot of streets. It needs a lot of streets. It does need a lot of streets. But one of the things that lots of streets facilitates is a paradox in this, which is skinny streets. But that's the other thing pedestrians hate. walking where there's a lot of asphalt and a lot of cars moving at dangerous speeds or dangerous trajectories. And so, what are the pedestrians? I mean, you know, if this is rocket science. You know, you just think where people like to go on vacation, right? Where do you want to go on vacation? Well, generally speaking, you don't want to go to Redwood Road, right? People, where Americans like to go on vacation? Well, they like to go to older cities, and if they have the time and the money, they want to go overseas and see different cultures. You know, maybe it's to South America, maybe it's to Europe, maybe it's to Asia. But usually the places that are most visited by Americans are places that have the most pedestrian-friendly environments. And they tend to have small blocks, skinny streets, sure sidewalks and bicycle facilities, a mixture of uses, and they're dense, right? So it's interesting, we spend so much time as Americans fighting density in the communities where we live, but then when we go on vacation, we go visit them. But this is, I know, a dirty word in some community councils. But without the concentration of people, you can't make the transit expensive, right? I mean, 10-acre block, it has 1.5 acre lots, which is how Salt Lake City's traffic. I'm not being right, but you only have one house per block here. How many houses is that? How many potential transit riders do you get? Maybe 20 for a 10-acre block.
I still have 15 transit.
Well, that's true. That's true. They were all poor, so they couldn't afford their own ox cart. You put 20 units, 30 units, 100 units per acre on this block. Now you're talking about a lot of people, a lot of potential transit riders. And the other thing that you already hit on, Taylor, is parking. When you start getting denser, land values tend to go up. Because there's a concentration of market in a particular place, and with increased land values, the affordability of providing abundant parking, off-street parking, becomes extremely difficult. And so the denser environments tend to be less parked because of that economic influence, first. But secondly, because the demand drops off. Again, I think we were talking about this in this class, the difference between Manhattan and Midway, right? If you're in Manhattan, the last thing you want is a car. And it's because it's a liability, it's a hassle. Where am I going to put the thing? There's no room on the street, it's going to get stuck in traffic anyway, right? So there's a synergy of these things all happening together. Mixture of uses, denser development, less parking, combined with urban design features of small blocks and skinny streets and good sidewalks and pedestrian bicycle facilities, transit supportive uses, the whole issue of access and adjacency to transit. There are other elements, but these are the big ones. Now, the ordinance that you read here today from Bloomington, Minnesota, how many of these issues do they hit? Pretty much all of them. And any good TRZ ordinance that you look at, and we've got several examples, and we didn't have to go all the way to Minnesota to get an example. We've got at least a dozen right here in the valley. But they all address these issues. So, if they're all important, what role does regulation play in creating these? there's the incentive. It's moving it that way. So they're creating an incentive so that you can get through the entitlement process faster. And under that ordinance, is transit-oriented development and design required. Okay. So zero, no parking minimum. Was there a parking maximum? But they didn't say there was a maximum. In the real aggressive jurisdictions, they have maximum, which is kind of revolutionary when you think about it. Off-street parking minimum requirements are kind of standard fare for zoning ordinances. You have to have so many, at least, the minimum, at least so many parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of developed space, per bedroom in the case of residential. And you can have, or you want more? Hooray! More is always good. That's the attitude of 90% to 95% of the zoning ordinances. In certain examples, certain places, it's all right. No? Okay. It's the last day of class. It's a little and certain, what I would call pod aggressive jurisdictions, they actually place a maximum. You can have no more than this specified amount. Because according to the local governments in these places, they don't want to see more land dedicated to parking because they consider it a dead space. Usually what you'll see is a range. So you'll get a map, you'll get a range. So it's not like you have to build exactly this amount. It is, you can build no more than, say, one space per bedroom and multiple. But you can go down to 0. Or in the case of commercial, maybe it'll be or office, it'll be 2 spaces per 1,000 square foot of usable space. That'll be the maximum, the minimum will be a half per 1,000 square feet, something like that. So they give this kind of range for the market to operate. But that's a little unusual. Now let's go to density. Again, 99% of the zoning ordinances in America say this is a cap. You may go no denser than this. If you want to be less dense than this, great, fine. This is a limitation. This is only a ceiling, not a floor, or whatever metaphor you want to use. You know, if you've got I was going through a list of residential, imaginary residential zoning districts in Salt Lake City. You have a residential single-family zone with 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, and you come in with a subdivision plat with 7,000 square foot lots. Can it be approved? Oh yeah, sure. That's less dense. It's fewer units per acre, no problem. You come in with a subdivision plat of 4,000 square foot lots, can you be approved? No. That's denser than is allowed. So the limitation only goes one direction, putting a cap on the amount of density that's required. Now, why do you suppose it's that? How did that happen? Well, yes, I mean politically, but what was there a danger? Do you think there was a concern or a danger that things would be built in a fashion that would be too spread out? Would people care about that? Was the market leading that? Because if that's the way the market was leading, you wouldn't need zoning, right? Or you wouldn't need density. The market was leading towards huge acreage lots. And that's what the market was providing, and that's what builders were building, and that's what consumers were consuming, purchasing. We wouldn't need to have a density limitation. We probably wouldn't need to have zoning. Zoning got put into place to try to quash the market, because the market wanted to go density. And at least some city leaders wanted to go. And so we adopted zoning ordinances and put density limitations in them to kind of work at cross purposes with where the market was going. Market wanted denser, consumers would buy denser, developers wanted to build denser, but we put a limitation on it and said, no, we're not going to let that. So we have essentially a maximum density paradigm when it still exists in about 99% of the union. In some of the more aggressive TOD zoning ordinances, you'll see density minimums. You will build at least distance. What do you think about that? Nick's scowling back. Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm particularly interested in hearing from the real estate development. What do you think about having minimum density? Not maximum, minimum.
I feel better about my investment because the commercial and guaranteed.
That's a perspective I hadn't thought of. That's me. Yeah, sure. If you're making an investment, or you're considering making an investment in some sort of commercial, especially commercial, having minimum densities would at least be, at the time, you could use the rooftops. Like the condo doors. That would make it possible. Most of the developer response to these is negative. And they're basically saying, wait a minute, you can't force the market. This is not regulation's purpose to dictate what density products should be built.
Yeah, I was thinking from like the Japanese standpoint, affordable housing. It's like what do you need to make affordable housing? Let's make small units and people can actually afford housing.
From the government perspective, from the public perspective, the thought is, okay, we've just spent hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to build this transit infrastructure, transit line stations. In order for that investment, public investment, to make sense, to hit essentially a pencil and to get a decent rate of return, we need to get a certain level of ridership. And we know that at least Americans are only willing to walk about a quarter mile, or maybe up to a half to get access to transit. And so if we allow the land within those quarter mile radii around our transit stations to be chewed up with low density development, that's just not going to create the ridership that we need to get a decent rate of return on the investment in the transit. And because especially residential development is so resilient, meaning it doesn't turn over very quickly. Commercial development turns over all the time. And now stuff gets built and then torn down. You just look at I was going to say Crossroads at City Creek. There used to be Crossroads. The Crossroads and DC My Center, they were there for 20 years, and there was something there before that. I mean, that stuff is always turning, always turning. Residential, on the other hand, tends to stay pretty much the same for a good 100 years, sometimes longer. And so, having this finite resource of all these different, here's a light rail line, and you have stations along the way, and you've got these half-mile bullseyes around these stations. This land is where we get most of our transit ridership from, potentially. And if we get split it away into quarter-acre lots, then we're kind of sunk in terms of getting ridership. And so we want to ensure or protect our investment by making certain density minimum guarantees. And the response of government is, well, yeah, maybe it's not marketable now. But it will become marketable at some point. And that's their attitude. My sense on this is that, I mean, I understand where the government's coming on this, but I do think it's harder to sell to institute a density minimum, at least at this point. Maybe sometime in the future we could see a situation that we address that. And this is the reason why. Because we have so many, what I would call overly draconian maximums that are standing in the way of good, denser, more transit-oriented developments in America, that this is what we should be concerned about. Instead of instituting minimums, let's get rid of maximums, or let's substantially increase the maximums, especially in transit-served areas. And let's let the market work itself out. Because right now, the market's being completely distorted by these maximums, these limitations on density. And it's really screwing up most of America.
What's behind the existing fear of going to rents? Especially now with our knowledge of consumers and what they like, drives traffic, and building development itself.
I think it's changing, but traditionally it's been what, Kevin? Those people, it's going to bring in people that are not like us. It has been, having density maximums has been a stand-in for covert racism in zoning. It's a way of, you know, if you think of your house as your investment, not a shelter, that is an interesting comment. Is it really investment? I don't think of where I live as an investment. I think of it as home. You know? But yeah, he's right. It isn't an investment. Whether it increases in value or whether it decreases in value really doesn't change whether it's home or not, right? But in the mid-20th century, it was housing was typically seen as being an investment. And if you were trying to protect your investment, you wanted to have development around you that was at least of the same quality and quantity as you were for better. Ideally, you want to have the worst house in the best neighborhood. You want to have the crappy split level ranch house in Harvard Yale instead of the palace in Rose Park. Right? Because the palace in Rose Park is going to be substantially undervalued because of what? Because of the surrounding neighborhood. The split level ranch in Harvard Yale is going to be overvalued because again it's surrounding neighborhood. So that's why these things got put into place. So zoning generally got put into place and why the density maximums got instituted. You know, the idea that crime is associated or correlates with density is creepy. It is. And I've got in some of the slides I showed in the other class, this scatter plot of crime statistics by density levels. And it's a complete scatter. There's no trend line, no association. High crime rates do correlate with high levels of poverty. Yeah, it does. You know, you get a bunch of people who are poor together, you're likely to see some antisocial behavior.
And I think that's where kind of some of that countries people have that association with density and lower income, just where the people who are more people have a bigger income, yeah, want that density, but people are not really totally making that connection.
Yeah, it is a housing affordability issue. And you know,
I guess there's
policymakers do.
They sort of do the thought even the most income in the housing pool, generations from that don't want to make that risk. They don't want to think about it. They just want similar flows. They don't want to spend all the paper on the house.
Right.
So it's not. They're going to they're going to have a higher income. They're not spending as much of that on the house.
Luckily, this is starting to change. And you get more and more jurisdictions that are looking at, if not establishing minimum, at least expanding upward what the maximum densities are, and that's a good thing. You know, taking some look at if not having a maximum parking level, at least like Salt Lake City has done, substantially reducing or eliminating parking minimum standards. Sometimes it's you can go a little overboard on this. It's very interesting. Charlie Hales is now the mayor of Portland, when he was a city council member, advocated for zero minimum parking standards, just about citywide, and that was something he was very proud of. Interesting, he used to be the lobbyist for the Home Builders Association, so go figure how he would get into this kind of politics. Anyway, he advocated for that probably 10 years ago. Now neighborhoods are kind of choking on all this parking that's happening on the street, and as a mayoral candidate, he vowed to remove that ridiculous policy. How absurd! Who came up with that? Don't answer that question. If you're interested in this topic, there's a great book on the subject called Zoned Out. It's by Jonathan Levine. And he basically makes this case that what we need to do first, before we ever start considering this, we need to start loosening up this and get out of the way of it. And demographics tell us that for the next generation or so, next 20 to 30 years, the market for higher density transit-oriented development is going to go up substantially. Because old people like me are retiring and wanting to downsize and be close to amenities and not have to drive. And because millennials are getting into start at the beginning of their careers, and they want to be in kind of hip places that have no vibe, no feel, and don't want to be tied down to mortgage. And so, that's where the market's going. And so I think at this point, for achieving some of these very good policy things, mainly what we need to do is let the market do what it does. Yeah, and that's what he argues for in some doubt. I am proud of the fact that I helped lobby for an administrative rule in Oregon that requires all jurisdictions in regions that have transit systems to greatly expand or eliminate maximum density for areas that are served by transit. And it was so weird because the building industry fought us on this. And this is more government regulation. Well, yes, it is a regulation in that it is an administrative rule from state government directed towards local government. But what it says is reduce your regulations, loosen your regulations, allow the market to do more of what it does. And I don't know what it was that they didn't get it. Maybe it's just because, always that environmentalist, he can't be arguing for anything good. They're trying to trick us. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, street patterns are commonly regulated. And that is something that I think where the public policy has something important to say about having a certain intersection density. Sometimes it's number of intersections per linear mile, street frontage, or maximum in the block spaces, block sizes. I think that is, because there we're really talking about the public infrastructure. Right? We're defining the streets by defining the blocks. And it is the public's job to define what the streets are. I think that's an appropriate role. Yeah. You'd see it just about every service. So the other thing I had to read today, and we're not going to go through it because it's not that compelling other than its mere existence, was I had you read through a deed restriction. An honest to goodness deed restriction for a real project in Portland. Because regulation is not the only way, not the only method to achieve these same results. They have a system in Portland, and we're starting to develop it here too, where there are public investments in transit-oriented development projects. Sometimes the investments are in the infrastructure. The government will participate with a private partner in paying for and developing the streets and sewers, or the school systems or the parks, or some sort of element of the public infrastructure. In exchange for that, what they bargain for, it's part of the developer agreement, what they bargain for is deed restrictions, restrictive covenants, right? Restrictive covenants that achieve some of these same objectives in the development that happens in that project. And in Portland, they call them Todd easements. Yeah, they call Todd easements, but they're not. I mean, when you look at it, it really is a restrictive covenant project because what it usually targets are these issues that are transit supportive issues, some transit supportive uses, so that some time down the road the project can't flip into a Walmart or something. So it puts a restriction on the uses of property that are allowed on the properties that are affected by the covenant. And instead, all the covenants we've looked at have basically been, anti-commercial restrictions, residential only. But in these examples, what's being restricted, what's being eliminated, are all the uses or the types of uses that are deemed to be non-transit support. So big box retail, full binaries, yeah, right. And drive-through restaurants and things like that. Sometimes, if the project's big enough, you'll see something in the restricted covenants having to do with block sizes, although that's less of a concern, or administrative use. So it's not always about regulation. Sometimes these things can happen with public-private partnerships combined with restricted use. So one last thing, and then we're going to close early today because I know we've got research, other people making music presentations tonight. There's this whole area that's related to this. It's called joint development. And transit agencies around the country have been getting into this. Some of them have been doing it for quite a while. Washington Metro has been very aggressive in engineering kind of joint development projects around metro stations. And other agencies are starting to catch on. I mean, it's starting to catch on here too. But it's the idea of a transit agency partnering with the private sector, with developers, to create jointly development projects that meet the needs both of the private partners in creating revenue and profit, and for the public partners, the public agencies in creating transit. And so probably the biggest example is Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., where the whole area surrounding the metro station was originally owned by Metro and was developed jointly with a series of private partners to create that environment. And Metro has been doing that at other stations around the metro system. We're starting to do that now here. We took a special bill, a special piece of legislation from the Utah legislature to allow UTA to do this. But we did it. Gladly. But we are now, along with Washington Metro, one of the few agencies in the country that is capable of contributing land into a limited liability corporation for purposes of development. And so now, because of that, UTA can now be kind of full joint partner in TOD projects. And it's really exciting. We've got about 5 projects currently underway in 10 to 15. But the way it works is after you get an agreement, management agreement with the developer, is that the LLC is created and the transit agency donates the land that will be used for the project into the LLC. That's their contribution. And then the developer provides other capital to make the project go. The first one that's already out of the ground, at least the parking garages are out of the ground, is out in West Jordan, out by the hospital. So if you take the red line on Coach David, if you need to stop, it's just before they get there. That stop there, and that whole, all the construction is going on there. Another one is, hopefully, sometime soon, it's going to be hard. Is at the country land in Sandy, Sandy Citizen. There's another one that is happening around the Frontrunner Station up in and so this is something that's coming, and I think it's exciting because it's a way of kind of meeting the needs of the public while supporting business and generating tax revenues for local governments. It's a very big thing. You know, meeting market demand. So questions about this? Yes. The 5 Ds? Yeah, they're on here somewhere. Density, diversity, design, adjacency, distance to transit, and accessibility. Destination accessibility, that's kind of implied here. I think we got that's referring to Professor Ewing's 5 Ds of land use and development. That would be on ours. Study that to Professor Ewing. So, the topics that we've covered for the past 2 weeks, they have been kind of free-ranging, wide-ranging, not kind of in the same type or quality as the things that we studied before then. You might reason to ask, well, what do I need to know for the exam? That's why I created the study guide. So when you're going through these topics and you want to kind of sift to the things that are important, refer to the study guide. That's what I'll be looking at when I write the exam. So, any questions? So on Tuesday next week, we're going to have a review session. We'll primarily focus on the study guide and that first sample question that's on the record from 2000. The time we'll get to the amendments also in 2000. I said this last time. I said you will get the most out of this if you, between now and Tuesday, sit down and write an essay response to the question. Don't just go through and highlight the issues. Actually write a response. Because remember, you want to write usually 2 to 3 sentences on each issue, right? You want to tell me what the legal principle is. You want to refer to the relevant fact in the fact pattern and come to some sort of conclusion, mini conclusion, about that issue for each issue. And once you start getting in the habit of writing that way, then it starts rolling off really easy. But at first, it seems a little awkward. So that's why I would suggest doing some practicing this ahead of time. If you do it before Tuesday, you're going to get through more through books. Cool. Well, good luck with everything that you're doing right now. And